And then a story on the IDF.
Here at TYT, we've been doing extensive coverage of the war crimes carried out by the Israelis in the Gaza Strip, in Lebanon, and in other parts of the Middle East. But one of the issues that's been really difficult to talk about is the sexual abuse against Palestinians carried out by IDF soldiers in some of these Israeli prisons. Now, many of these Palestinians are detained and never charged with anything. And if they ever see a day in court, it's usually through military courts where they're better described as kangaroo courts. But while they are detained with no charges.
I wonder where that expression comes from, like kangaroos in courts?
Oftentimes they suffer abuse, including sexual abuse. And we saw footage of several IDF soldiers sexually abusing a Palestinian man. That footage, that evidence was floating around the internet. And then we later find out that the IDF soldiers had all of their charges dropped against them after members of, the Israeli society started protesting the very notion that they would suffer any criminal charges for what they did. Then we start hearing this gaslighting about how you didn't see what you actually saw with your own two eyes. That's not what was shown in the video. If you've watched the video, that is what you see in the video.
I've watched the video.
So here to explain how the charges got dropped, how this story got buried in Israel, is a wonderful person who I have a lot of respect for. His name is...
So you have to understand, you have IDF soldiers that are caught on camera raping Palestinian. There's medical evidence supporting this. It's an open and shut case. Nothing happened to those soldiers. Not only that, but they then get treated as heroes. Yeah, rapists are heroes in Israel. Didn't you know that?
Shael Ben Ephraim. He was an IDF soldier himself, but has since become a bit of a whistleblower. He's a geopolitical analyst, and I welcome him on the show right now. Thank you for joining us, Shael.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I came across your post on X where you were detailing how that story, and more importantly, how those charges were dropped. Like, what was the pressure campaign behind the scenes? And I thought it was so enlightening. So I'm just going to go to you right now and explain to us what happened after that video footage was released and everyone knew it was going on.
Yeah, so the judicial system in Israel thought that this was a very strong case because there was a complaint, there was physical evidence, there was a checkup by doctors, and all of that.
And camera footage of the event.
Since discovered that one of the reasons this complaint reached the judicial levels is because the guards there thought that the wounds had been inflicted by another Palestinian inmate. Once they learned that it was actually Israeli guards that did it, and that had been corroborated by the doctor they had sent this person to be checked by, there was panic in the Israeli system.
And meaning, if they had known that it was these wounds were supposedly by Israeli guards, they would have never let him have this medical checkup to begin with.
And while the judicial arm continued to try to pursue it, the political and security arm tried to destroy it. Israel Katz came out and said that it was a blood libel. There were demonstrations against it. There was a pressure campaign to bury the charges from the defense minister and from the prime minister and from the chief of staff. The main prosecutor of the army was alarmed by this and tried to release the video to the media, which he did successfully. That's why you've seen it. It was not the policy of Israel to release that video. She did it on her own recognizance to Channel 12 in Israel.
And I don't believe that prosecutor is alive anymore, if I'm right.
To my surprise, aired it. Then she was fired from her job for releasing that. There was an entire unclear episode where she threatened to commit suicide, left a suicide note. So it's unclear if she really wanted to commit suicide, if there were plans to kill her off. She was found before she could commit suicide. She's since disappeared in the sense that she's not talking to the public. She's
still alive. That's good.
Supposedly alive and safe. And Netanyahu and the defense minister have since said that it's fantastic that the charges were dropped. They called the families of the accused and said that their sons are heroes. And
yeah, if you rape people, you're a hero in Israel.
That was the end of that. And this is one of the very few cases where there was even a minor investigation. Oh, and another thing. Once the investigation started, the suspect who had been abused was released to Gaza so that he could not give any testimony. And that was the official reason that the investigation was.
And who knows if after being released, someone just put a bullet in his head right away. So to make doubly sure he could never testify.
Dropped because they had no one to give testimony. The Israeli authorities also tried to swap out the doctor's report for another.
I mean, you're talking about people that are covering up rape. These are people without morals. Of course, they'd be willing to kill to cover something like this up.
A doctor who was more sympathetic, who actually hadn't seen the individual because the individual was already gone, and he said that nothing had happened to him and he hadn't suffered any damage without seeing the patient. So we actually
Is that hilarious? So they're trying to contradict the doctor who examined the patient and came up with certain conclusion. That's this new doctor, without ever examining anyone, comes to the opposite conclusion.
have 2 different medical reports out. One from a doctor who's seen him, who said that there was an attempt to rape him, and another from a doctor who said nothing happened to him, who hadn't seen him.
So before I go to you, Cenk, for a question, I just want to read what the Wall Street Journal had reported about this man's injuries. He had life-threatening injuries, including broken.
Kanye is right about some things, and sometimes he's a little off the reservation on other topics.
Broken ribs, obvious signs of assault to the abdomen and chest, and a severe injury to the rectum, most likely caused by the insertion of a foreign object, one of the medical staffers said. It was pretty horrifying. It's just setting the bar so low that I don't know how we can deteriorate more morally. This is a medical staffer saying this about the Palestinian detainee. I was aware things like that could happen, but I've never witnessed anything like that. So I just want people to understand what was really going on. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, so Shail, I want to talk to you about the different sectors of the Israeli government, society, et cetera, in a minute. But first, the obvious question. Once you very publicly released these guys who did the rape on tape, and it's not like people can't see.
Yeah, raped on tape, doctor confirming everything, open shut case, they get released, treated as heroes.
They can see with their own eyes. What do you think are the consequences of that? Is that basically a giant green light, a de facto way for the government to say, abuse the detainees in every imaginable and unimaginable ways, and there will be no consequences?
Yeah, there's absolutely no question about that. The Israeli government was alarmed that any of this came out to begin with. What they want is complete carte blanche for the guards to do whatever they want to the detainees. I know from talking to guards at Sde Teiman that this particular incident was not all that severe in relation to others. Like I said, it was a comedy of errors that led to the fact that this was released because they thought that it was another inmate who did it. Otherwise, they never would have released it. So all that Israel wants is to silence this as much as possible. And that, of course, means that guards are allowed to do this. And some of the guards who were involved have become celebrities. Some went on shows with their masks on, but some went without their masks on, and some have Instagram accounts that have been growing in popularity and talk all the time about killing Arabs and committing war crimes and how great it is. They become celebrities. It's incentivized to do these things. They are considered heroes. And very few people consider what they did to be wrong, because there's 2 schools of thought in Israel. One is they weren't doing anything, and the other is they're terrorists, so they deserve it.
Wow.
But either way, it's completely allowed. It's encouraged. The only thing we don't know is, are there orders coming in to do this? Like Christoph said in his article,
I don't even know if you need the orders coming in to do it.
That he found no evidence that there's an order to do these things. We know for sure that no one is stopping it, which gives them an incentive. I wouldn't be surprised if there are orders coming in from somewhere. I mean, Ben Gvir basically gave the order publicly to make their lives as terrible as possible. That's what he said. Detainees should be treated as badly as possible, but he didn't specify. We don't know what the specifications are. But at the very least, they're allowing guards to do whatever they want to detainees.
Yeah, I just want to explain to the audience, there really is no functional difference between saying abuse these detainees and we will not punish you if you abuse these detainees. It's the same exact thing. So you can say, no, murder is technically illegal, but we're not going to punish anyone who does murder. Robbery is illegal, but we're not going to punish anyone who does robberies. So you're going to have nonstop robberies. Same thing for rape. And in this case, this is literally.
Okay, as soon as you said that, I thought, California. Robbery stops being illegal. Stop prosecuting people for shoplifting. Know what happens? Shoplifting explodes. Yes, that's exactly it.
Rape. They say we will not punish anyone. In fact, we will celebrate the people who rape the detainees. And by the way, they're terrorists.
They sort of do that too in California, because yeah, oh my God.
Had it coming. No, tons and tons of the detainees are random hostages that the Israelis have picked up.
No one has it coming, okay? Even terrorists. No one has it coming. You don't get to rape people in prison because you consider them terrorists, or they are terrorists, or
by the way,
criminals. Like, it's wrong, period. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong to abuse people like that.
And Ben Gvir, of all people, should agree with that, since Ben Gvir is a convicted terrorist supporter. So if he were to be imprisoned in Israel, according to the Israeli logic, he should be raped.
So I want to get a better understanding of Israeli society, because we don't live in Israel, and I want to just understand the culture a little better, because you talk about how it's kind of bifurcated when it comes to the reaction or response to this particular incident. You have half of the people, you say, who acknowledge what happened and they justify it or they celebrate it, and you have these, alleged rapists being celebrated as celebrities, and then the other half are either pretending to be ignorant about it or are genuinely ignorant about it, think it didn't happen at all. I know I said half-half, but it's probably not half-half. Like, what portion of society genuinely doesn't believe it, right? And if they did believe it, then they would be.
The only people that can't believe it are those who went out of their way never to watch the video. And so they can delude themselves into thinking it never happened. Anyone who watched the video knows it did.
Against it, because I really need to know that. I want to know how many people, what percentage of Israeli society thinks that this kind of behavior is justified?
Yeah, it's very hard to answer that question because so many of the people who are saying that it didn't happen know that it happened, and that's why it's very difficult. I think I can speak for myself that when all these abuses started coming out, I didn't believe that they were real because I was conditioned to believe that Israel, well, it was a flawed country, but there were red lines that I wouldn't cross. I very quickly discovered that that was not true as more and more.
By the way, I've said this for a while. It's always been like this. It's not like Israel just started now raping detainees. It's been doing it for decades. It's not like all these bad practices, like it was funding the genocide of Christians in Syria in 2011, like 15 years ago. It's not new, this type of thinking in Israel. It's just what's changed after COVID is the media situation. You now have far more alternative media. You now have, before, like 15 years ago, someone like him, he's barely getting any interviews or any exposure anywhere because there just wasn't the alternative media there is today. And so that's what changed. Far more people are learning the truth. The truth hasn't changed. It's just, it's reaching a lot more people.
Evidence came out. I think that a lot of Israelis knew before I did because they were involved in the army and the security forces, and those that weren't and knew later are already inundated by so many facts, but they are denying it for tactical reasons. So I would say the vast majority of Israelis think that the detainees did something wrong and deserve it, and think that even the ones that are picked up that they can't prove something are most likely terrorists. And even the ones who aren't terrorists, this is a deterrent to prevent them from doing October 7th again. I truly believe that the vast majority of Israelis in their hearts think.
You want to prevent October 7th from happening again? Okay, here's how you do it. You prevent Netanyahu from giving $1.3 billion to Hamas. Yes, that happened between 2012 and 2022. Money came from Qatar, goes to the IDF, into Netanyahu's hand, and he hands it over to Hamas. Now, if you don't provide literally billions of dollars to terrorist organization, you might not be happen another September 11th, October 7th.
That this is true. And I've heard some of my friends who vote Meretz and other parties, some of my close friends, say, look, if they did it to people who did October 7th, it's not a big deal. And this is the left.
Wow.
And I've seen people on the right glorify it and say that that's what they deserve. So there's different shades of thinking that it's okay. There's some people who think it's regrettable, but that's what happens in jails. Like I've heard that. That's the most sort of left-wing thing I've heard from actual Zionists is, well, it's very bad that this happens, but every jail there's rapes and there's abuses. I've heard some Zionists say that. So that's the spectrum. There's
yeah, but usually it's the inmates doing it to each other, not as often the guards.
different forms of justification. But the only people who are really against it tend to be anti-Zionists and Arabs. There's very few Zionists who are against it.
All right, so let's break it down a little bit more. Israeli society and government has a lot of different components. You have the judiciary, you have the cabinet, and the press. These are all different, right? So the government right now is as hard right-wing as you could possibly get. There's not much dispute about that among rational people. But the judiciary often does well, not in regards to settlers or the IDF, where they just run total kangaroo military courts that are a total joke, or towards Palestinians. But inside Israel, Ben-Gvir was convicted of supporting terrorism. There were real corruption charges against Netanyahu, and the Israeli court system before has worked. And the press sometimes gives us some of our best reporting on what's happened in Gaza, and far better than American press. Not all of it, but Haaretz and 972 and others. So, okay, so it felt, Shael, like there was some foothold for rationality and decency to make a comeback, right? Secularism to make a comeback in Israel. But it feels like that's getting, chipped away at every single day. And we might be at a critical moment here where we're past the tipping point. That's what we're worried about. What's your sense of that?
Yeah, you raised some very good points. There is a liberal Israel, or there was a liberal Israel, based around parties like Meretz and Labor, based around the universities like Hebrew University. And the Supreme Court had a lot of justices that came out of that tradition, like Aaron Barak in particular is a notable judge of that.
A lot of the stories about what the IDF is doing are broken by Israeli media. And so, yes, they do. Well, it's Israel, so of course Israeli media is better placed to get inside scoops. And that's what happens.
school of thought that stressed the importance of human rights and secularism, mostly within Israel, like you said, and not so much in the territories, although occasionally in the territories. But even that very partial liberalism is dying. There's been a very concentrated attack on it. You might remember before October 7th, there were all these judicial reforms that there was an attempt to pass. And that was a targeted pinpoint attack at those elements of Israeli society. And then while at war, this extreme right-wing government has made very big inroads towards it. Now they're going to appoint one of their own as the Supreme Court justice, which is going to be a death knell to all that. And I've had friends who've attended some of these Supreme Court hearings, and members of Knesset go in there and intimidate them and yell at the justices if they dare say anything in favor of detainees or in favor of Palestinian rights, that they're terrorists and that this is why the Supreme Court needs to be dissolved. And there's protests in front of the houses of justices, sometimes threats on their lives. There's a real sense of intimidation on anyone who's liberal, and it's dragging the courts more and more to the right. They're essentially becoming rubber stamps of the government. And as the government puts in more and more right-wing justices, that's only going to continue. So that kind of liberal element of the Israeli judicial.
Yeah, that makes me very pessimistic for Israel's future, because U.S. support isn't forever. When dollar runs into trouble, that's going to get cut off completely. And if you have this type of society, this type of government that is this extreme, once the U.S. cuts off aid, Israel will need to compromise and coexist with its neighbors. I don't know if this current Israel is capable of coexistence.
System is eroding and will probably die. And the changes in the demographics in Israel are going to exacerbate that process even more.
I was going to ask you about that, because I mean, a few weeks ago, I was flying home from a trip I was on, and there were a couple sitting right in front of me, and they turned around and thanked me for the work I do. I was like, oh, thank you, thank you. And then they said they're Israeli, and I was kind of shocked. But I think that they're probably Israelis who left Israel, because there has been, just based on anecdotal evidence, I might be wrong, that's why I'm asking you. It appears that there's been almost like a flight of, the types of people who think the way we think, that would see a rape on camera and find it like shockingly immoral and would want consequences for it. So would you say that that a lot of Israelis since October 7th have left Israel, and those tend to be people who have political views more in line with decency?
Yes, there's been a brain drain from Israel of the most educated people with PhDs, high-tech, doctors, people like that, who it's easy for them to leave the country and do well. They tend to be, not always, but disproportionately liberal. A lot of them left before October 7th. There's always been a big community of people like that here in California, where I am, and in New York, and in Berlin, there's a big community. But since October 7th, that has increased. There's very few people I know with opinions similar to mine who think that Israel has a future. Some of them stay for various reasons, relatives, or they're not used to it, or they're English or whatever. But there's been a turning point in the last year or two where very few people think that the future is going to be good. Because not only are there all these elements of fascism rising, the same way we see in the United States, but unlike the United States, there's a sense of hopeless demography behind it. When liberal elites are leaving and the ultra-Orthodox and the settlers are having more children, that ultimately leads to a deep change in the fabric of the country. And those who are younger, who would be maybe liberal in the past, are going through an education system that's very nationalist and very extreme. So if you look at the polls of young voters, they're much more right-wing than the older voters are. And the older voters are pretty right-wing. So we're really looking at a situation that a lot of liberal Israelis consider to be hopeless. And so a lot of liberal Israelis like myself are moving towards more anti-Zionism. And a lot of them are thinking about how to leave the country if they haven't left already.
So let me follow up on that. How much do liberal Jews in Israel feel pressure? Like, it reminds me of other genocides where, the good Germans, the good Turks, whoever they might be, the good Serbs would.
It's an interesting angle. It's this one issue where, like the left is anti-Israel, yes, pro-Palestinian, whatever, but the right, since they have to be against everything that the left is for, in a lot of cases, they become pro-Israel because of that. Or I think Nux Taku, he has family that died in October 7th, so he has an understandable bias. But he's on the same page as him on nearly every issue, as long as it doesn't involve Israel. But on that, like there's some stuff like the content of this video, like rape in prisons. This isn't where there's no doubt, where there's video evidence, medical evidence. And you have the rapists not prosecuted, but instead celebrated as heroes. It should be for anyone that's halfway decent, be like, this is absolutely terrible.
Would be shunned or shamed or imprisoned or in other ways outcast. Is that happening in Israel?
Well, traditionally, there's a surprising amount of tolerance towards the Israeli left. There used to be demonstrations, newspapers, parties. They were seen as traitors or nut jobs, but there wasn't a lot of violence towards them and that sort of thing. That's changing. Now, people who go to anti-war demonstrations or even anti-Netanyahu demonstrations receive death threats. And are feeling increasingly uncomfortable. They're getting beaten up by the police. Occasionally, they're being arrested for what they post on social media. This is just starting. It's just starting because this is not the traditional Israeli way. The traditional Israeli way is if you're a Jew, you can have sort of whatever opinion you want. But that's really changing. It's nowhere near as bad as it's been in other genocides yet, but that's a matter of time. I think that this current government still has remnants of the old approach. Netanyahu.
Wait. It's not as bad as it's been in other genocides yet? What other genocides? What?
I was an Israeli born in 1948. But people like Ben Gvir, whom I believe will end up being prime minister, or someone like him will end up being prime minister, are going to crack down on freedom of speech. So this is a process that's starting for Jews as well. We're seeing attacks also on those that go to the territories to help protect Palestinians. But usually people, you're sitting at home expressing your opinion, it's not so bad, but that's starting to change.
So last two things here. To give us a sense of what percentages, and again, I know these are rough, right, of Israelis these days are religious fundamentalists. What percentage are just nationalists, like Zionists, secular, but Israel above all, right? And then what percentage are what we would traditionally call liberal left, care about human rights, hey, maybe two-state solution, that type of thing?
Well, I'm going to look at the Jewish population because the Arab population doesn't really fall into those categories.
Yep.
It falls into completely different categories. So among the Jews, I would say somewhere between 30 and 40% are religious enough that it really influences their political outlook, and that's going to rise to 50% within the next few years. They combine the borders are very porous between them.
That's never a good sign when 50% of your population is so religious. Basically, religious extremists. 50% of your population. That's I can't think of any country, successful country that is. Has that.
And the nationalist Zionists, who the typical Zionist puts security first above all, and that includes some of the religious people. That's probably about, 50, 60%. And then actual liberal people who have liberal ideals also towards the Palestinians are 10%, something like that. Now,
10%.
There's more people than that who think that they're liberal because they believe in a more secular, tolerant country inside Israel. And they don't like Ben Gvir and they don't like Netanyahu. But a lot of them really don't care what happens to the Palestinians. That's an increasing amount of the people who vote against Netanyahu and demonstrate against Netanyahu really don't care what happens in Gaza and what happens in the West Bank.
Yeah.
So those who actually care are 10% and probably dropping.
So last question is about the diaspora. Because it feels like a lot of the Jews across the world who support Israel have been taught that that's part of their identity and it's important and all Jews are going to be killed if it's not for Israel, etc. But I think that they still...
I sort of feel it's the opposite way, that Israel is going to get a lot of Jews killed.
Have a romanticized version of Israel in their head where kibbutz and we go and Tel Aviv is nice and it's wonderfully moral and relatively liberal and a westernized democracy and etc. And they don't have any sense of how radical religious and right-wing Israel has gotten. But I'm just guessing. So that's why I'm asking you. So do you think that's relatively right? And is that causing a huge problem because they're accidentally enabling the worst right-wing instincts of the current government and society of Israel?
There's some of that ignorance, but I think a lot of it is just cognitive dissonance. Everyone sees what Israel's doing. Everyone sees what the Israeli
Nuxtaku, victim of this.
Election results are, what the policies are. Maybe they don't know the exact demographics, but they get a sense. It's true that if you visit Tel Aviv, you don't really understand what's happening in Israel. Not that Tel Aviv is that liberal, but compared to the rest of the country, it's super liberal. But I think that for a lot of American Jews, Israel has become such an important part of their identity that they feel they have to grasp at every single straw in order to defend it, even as it becomes increasingly indefensible. And the older you are, the more you're invested in Israel and in the need to defend it. And we're seeing younger Jews with a lot less skin in that game and a lot less of the sunk cost issue regarding Israel, and they're much more willing to accept. So I don't think it's really a lack of information per se, as much as it's an issue of cognitive dissonance, because the amount of information that we've received about Israel doing bad things, even before October 7th, but now every day something shocking comes out that really should make you question your support for Israel. And I look at the people defending Israel and I almost feel pity for them. It's like, how can you defend this? And every day it's a new PR crisis. And every day they're trying desperately, but that's because it's part of their identity. I don't know if they really believe that Israel is that just anymore. They do believe that Israel is being targeted disproportionately because of anti-Semitism. That's a genuine belief most Jews have.
Israel creates anti-Semitism. Like stories like this. No, I don't think the future is bright for Israel, unfortunately. Anyway, this will be on YouTube. Like and subscribe. Come watch on Kick or Twitch. And I'll see you next video. Bye.